Welcome to the Freight Project podcast, brought to you by Cerasis, a North American third-party logistics company providing shippers transportation management, technology, and solutions.
On today's The Freight Project podcast episode, I welcome back Mark Burdette, Cerasis Sales Solutions Consultant, to discuss the importance of making sure that shippers are using best practices when it comes to the fundamentals and getting the right shipment details to accurately fill out a bill of lading. In the episode, you'll hear Mark start off getting us all on the same page with what freight shipment details need to be considered and documented before a shipper seeks out carrier rates. Then Mark gets more specific on freight shipment details in regard to accessorials and freight classification, and why it is vital that shippers get these right, and what are the impacts on shipping processes and costs when a shipper doesn't enter this information correctly. Further, Mark explains why it is bad form to not worry about reclasses, reweighs, or add-on fees, known as accessorials, and simply do what a shipper has always done without making any changes. Mark then offers expert best practices and tips for those shippers who want to avoid mistakes on the bill of lading and get accurate freight shipment details. Finally, Mark lets us know how a customer at Cerasis was helped in improving the bill of lading process and how common the problem of inaccurate freight shipments details really are. We hope you enjoy this episode of the Freight Project Podcast. Well, hello, Mark. It's great to have you back on the Freight Project Podcast. Today, we have you on to discuss a topic that seems pretty basic on the surface, yet many shippers still take for granted: the freight shipment details that they need to create an accurate bill of lading. Go figure. So, to make sure that we start off all on the same page, can you give the listeners some of those freight shipment details that need to be considered and documented before a shipper seeks out any carrier rates to get to that bill of lading?
Sure. Basically, when shipping freight through an LTL carrier, there's a lot of specific requirements needed for tendering a shipment. And these include and aren't limited to origin and destination addresses, contact information, commodity detail, corresponding NMFC codes and their class, as well as dimensions, weight, and any additional accessorials needed. Beyond the requirements for a shipment, there are a few other items that should be included to protect the shipper, and that would be things such as declared value and piece detail.
Well, and it sounds like, what we're really talking about today is going back to the fundamentals. I'm a marketing manager. I've been doing marketing for 15 years, and just like the world of freight and supply chain, as they're experiencing such upheaval and disruption in their processes, as the economy changes, as, different regulations get into place, like the ELD mandate, or, we're seeing the rise of these digital freight matching apps. It reminds shippers that despite all of this change, there are some fundamental things that they must follow. And one of those things is as simple as, getting to that bill of lading and understanding those freight shipment details. So, thanks for reminding shippers to think about those things. But let's really focus in on a couple of these details. And I know that even though we have $1 million LTL shippers, freight classification and accessorials always seems to come up. And whether it's, I think my class is this because that's what I've always been using, or I don't think I need a lift gate, but they end up doing need a lift gate. Why is it vital that shippers get freight classification and accessorial correct? And what are the impacts on shipping processes and especially costs when a shipper doesn't enter that information correctly?
Well, that's a very good point, and a lot of people do struggle with these areas, and it's important to remember that every commodity has a specific NMFC code, and with many of those commodities, they have differing rules or stipulations attributed to them, such as DIM or density-based commodities requiring a PCF or pounds per cubic foot that can make the class vary. So even though you have the NMFC code, there could be subclasses or stipulations on that based on density or certain rules that can make that class vary. I come across a lot of shippers that express that their class is, let's say, 50, but they receive reclassification charges and really don't know why. Unfortunately, NMFC codes can change and do so several times a year. So sometimes, a shipper could be processing shipments for a long time, and they're like, hey, I know this is my NMFC code and class that I've been using forever, but now I'm getting hit with this, and they may not know that has changed. And shippers should make sure that their codes and classes are accurate and up to date. Additionally, should a carrier provide a reclassification, oftentimes the price will be adjusted to the now correct and valid NMFC code and class, but it can also be hit with an additional fee because of the error. In saying that, you're much better off providing the correct information up front rather than receive an adjustment. To answer your questions regarding the need for additional accessorials, it's important that shippers understand the accessorials prior to booking the shipment. There's nothing worse than getting a quote or booking a shipment and having that price change because of an additional accessorial that was needed. And many times the additional cost can be much more than if the accessorial was included on the front end. For instance, let's take liftgate. If the shipper doesn't select liftgate and it's required at the destination for delivery, that carrier might not have a liftgate on that trailer to drop off the shipment. And then this would cause the carrier to have to return the shipment back to the terminal and load the shipment onto a trailer that has a liftgate. And obviously this can be disruptive to the carriers, and due to the additional movements and lost operational efficiency of the carriers, this can impact the price of the shipment quote dramatically, and understandably so. So if these shipments accessorials are once again notated ahead of time, maybe the same or even a different carrier could have quoted that shipment, and it would have been, marginally more expensive potentially. However, being inevitably billed on the end kind of disrupts their own work environment, both for the carrier and for the customer. And as a partner to both the carriers and the shippers, we want to help maintain profitability and operational effectiveness for all parties involved. And so not having those things selected on the front end can kind of cause issues for all parties involved.
Yeah, it's like a help me, help you
right.
kind of environment. Tell me all of those details, and I'm going to give you the best options and the best service. And, whether a shipper's just forgetting those things, that's one thing. Or sometimes shippers are really trying to, reduce costs. They're under a lot of pressure, and sometimes they do things that they think, maybe I can get away with this. And it doesn't mean that the freight manager or the logistics manager is a bad person. It's just a lot of pressure. And I think a lot of us do that in our personal lives, where we try to take these shortcuts thinking, oh, okay, maybe things won't get reweighed. Maybe things won't get tacked on for an accessorial I forgot. But ultimately, and I think this is where age and wisdom, you finally figure this out, that if you just did it right on the front end and were as educated as possible, you'll really save a lot of time in the long run, and it can come back to bite you. And as you said, disrupted operations can really mean more than just the cost of that freight shipment. It can reduce your relationship with that carrier. It can, waste your own time, and ultimately, lose the objective that you were starting out in spending much more money. And in fact, we've had a lot of our customers who are now customers come to us, and upon our first discovery calls, we find out that they're not really following some of these shipment detail best practices in building their bill of lading, or they're not educated on it enough, even at some of these large shippers. So why is it bad form to not really focus on things like reclasses, reweighs, or these accessorials, and just simply do what that shipper's been doing for the last 10 years without making any changes, especially as you mentioned, the move towards density based and understanding PCF.
Yeah, so there's a couple different factors in there, and I think to what you said, making sure that you're having best practices. I think a lot of times shippers don't even realize these things are needed kind of on the front end, and maybe their customer hasn't been upfront with those requirements, but it is good practice to make sure that you're kind of asking all the questions, that you're not getting hit on the back end. And when that happens, there's a lot of issues created by either not understanding or correcting the changes. And sometimes the shipper is unaware that this is happening, as I was just saying, and it can be massively affecting their bottom line. More so, how can you ensure that you're paying an appropriate price for these shipments if you're not keeping track of any changes that happen on the back end or adjustments to those bills? Oftentimes, shippers will have a perceived rate or discount, or maybe even an FAK through a carrier, and feel comforted by the fact that the rates they have on paper can be touted as impressive. However, upon doing a more in-depth analysis that we often do, we oftentimes find glaring holes or lost savings due to issues just like these that they're not really capturing. And it's really important to look at the overall spend post-billing to help mitigate these losses. Of course, any accessorial may increase the cost of the shipment, like I said, on the front end, but measuring the impact between selecting the accessorial up front versus after an adjustment can be pretty dramatic, especially in the long run. And when this happens, it really causes an internal dilemma for the shipper. If you receive an adjustment, have you already billed your customer? And if you've already billed them, do you eat the change in cost yourself? Or are you going to assign your personnel to attempt to recompense that change in the cost to your customer? And like I said, a lot of times shippers have already billed their customer, or like, let's say it's e-commerce and it's in the checkout cart. And that can lead to either a lot of lost profit due to eating the additional charges that were billed them, or it can lead to issues with customer satisfaction, trying to, once again, like I said, get back or, assign that responsibility for maybe the lack of transparency on the front end. Obviously, operationally, it's really paramount to growth and success to ensure that you're quoting, billing, and managing your supply chain as accurately as possible.
Hey, fundamentals matter, right?
Absolutely.
And I always say that Tim Duncan, who they called Mr. Fundamental, played for the Spurs from 1997 to like a couple of years ago. But about 20 years he played in all. And in that 20-year period, Greg Popovich, who was the coach of the Spurs, still is, he led that team to have the highest winning percentage of any sports team in any sport, right? So what does that say? Fundamentals still matter. Oh, yeah. And guess what? Billy Beane, who was the Moneyball guy for the Oakland A's, he kind of brought back that analytical approach, that data approach, right? And it was all about really just focusing on the fundamentals, again, to be more successful. And now you're seeing teams and businesses and everyone really seeing that, wow, fundamentals still matter. We have all these great shiny technology tools that maybe make things seem easier, but data entered into these systems, just like our Cerasis Rater, if inaccurate or not correct, it really is breaking the potential benefits that you gain from the use of that transportation management system, or really any technology platform you're using to gain efficiency. And so what are maybe some of the best practices that shippers can consider to kind of really overcome the lack of fundamentals that might be happening when it comes to getting those accurate freight shipment details?
Well, first I would say to make sure that you're entering all the aforementioned details correctly on the BOLs or bills of lading. I would recommend including all of the things kind of that I mentioned before, whether it's required or not, as it'll only help the shipper both in the long run and should you ever have to dispute a charge or file a claim. Second, it's important to have your invoices audited. This can help you with both understanding adjustments applied to your shipments, ensuring that they're accurate, and also that so that you can fix it going forward by seeing these disruptions, in your supply chain or anomalies. As you said, obviously focusing on the fundamentals is important, but more than that, as you were saying with the data, collecting the data, having visibility to the data is important, but if you're not doing anything with that data, then it doesn't really benefit you. We at Cerasis actually do commodity reviews with the customers beforehand, review their products and make sure that we are validating and entering all the correct NMFC codes and classes based on their products to make sure the information entered is up to date. Furthermore, we provide transparency in the terms of price change reports, notification to the customer of these price changes, and also actively managing and fixing these changes going forward, including notifying the customer should there be any updates that happen to their product stipulated by the NMFTA or National Motor Freight Transportation Association and the CCSB or Commodity Classification Standards Board.
Well, it's kind of like the Army. There's so many acronyms that folks need to know in freight. But you know what? That makes a lot of sense, right? Logistics really got at least its start in times of war. So logistics and the military and that kind of accurate planning go hand in hand. So I wouldn't expect anything less than the amounts of acronyms, including LTL, right? And that's where we, less than truckload for those who don't know. I was one of those about 8 years ago, but I quickly got educated. But speaking of LTL, really that's what Cerasis has helped a lot of shippers, freight shippers master over our 21-year history. So, we talk about best practices, making sure that our shippers are really understanding the importance of getting freight shipment details accurate. So can you maybe share a story, not to embarrass them or put them on the spot, of a customer that you have here at Cerasis who maybe had a chronic problem with these bad freight shipment details for LTL, and maybe how we went about helping them to correct this problem and what they've seen as far as benefits from improving those fundamentals?
Absolutely. Before I go into that, as you were saying, acronyms, I think we need to start making some more acronyms in the freight industry that are more fun, like, turning WTF into where's the freight or something.
Oh, there you go. That might be a future podcast show where you can put on.
Logistics, acronyms. Anyways,
I love it.
But I have a customer who did everything they could as an e-commerce shipper prior to working with us to make sure that they were filling out the BOLs correctly. They would even go to Google Earth to look at the destination address to see if they had a dock requiring the need for a lift gate, determining if the destination was a residential neighborhood, or, if they were delivering to a hospital, selecting limited access. However, they were still receiving adjustments, and the major issue for them is the bills they were getting from their logistics company did not notate what the charge was for or why, which led to a lot of confusion and frustration by, one, not having the transparency of that information, and also to understand what they were doing wrong. When we onboarded with them, we actually had to set the expectation that we were going to do everything we could on the front end to assist in making sure that she was initially selecting the correct accessorials. But more importantly, we would monitor the first couple of weeks of shipments to discover what was happening and to fix it should she receive any adjustments that maybe we weren't aware of on the front end. When all was said and done, we fixed most of these issues right at the start, and the others were resolved over a couple of weeks, resulting into an overjoyed customer that better understood her own supply chain, and then therefore was able to quote, process, and bill their customers correctly, which before they were eating the cost because they were kind of in a rehabilitation market and didn't want to impact their customer base negatively by just trying to help their own health, But in the end, that really made a massive difference to, like I said, both them and their customer satisfaction and controlling their bottom line. We actually have a case study on our website regarding this exact same situation, and which in her words, she can attest to both the issues and the success of being able to have that visibility and fix these things and the results inherent with it.
Oh, make sure on this podcast publishing page that we include that case study. So for those listening, via iTunes or Google Play or Spotify, make sure you go to Cerasis.com and under blogs and resources, click the podcast category and look for this episode so you can find that case study. And Mark, I really think you've laid out really sufficiently to our listeners the importance of gathering those fundamental freight shipment details so that the bill of lading is accurate and you can really mitigate some of those, carriers coming back with those extra charges that you did not expect to see simply because you didn't get all the freight shipment details accurate. And you've really laid out kind of some of the shippers' experiences of, even though they're doing their best, they may just not be able to, understand exactly how to get those best freight shipment details. In your experience, though, is this really, something that we're highlighting, or is this really a common issue that you're hearing frequently?
To be honest, everyone is dealing with this in some form or another. For every customer we engage with, as I mentioned before, we like to run an analysis based on the customer's previous invoices, both to provide an accurate kind of rate comparison, but more importantly, to understand their freight and issues that they're having, such as these. Of all the analysis I've done, I don't know that I've run across many to any customers that were immune to things like this. And most of the time, they were just unaware that, like I said, either their NMFC code had changed, or maybe they were just using a subclass requiring, a dimension, and had no idea that there was other classes that was just the code that they used, and it fit, maybe their one pallet shipment that they started doing, but as they were growing, then they started, shipping half pallets or extended the amount of product on a pallet or more pallets, and it changed those things, could change the class, and they weren't aware of it. And to be completely honest, it's really difficult to ensure every detail is perfect on every bill of lading. Whether it's a dropship customer and maybe their vendor is processing the shipment on their behalf, is the relevant information being put on there by their vendor? Or even if your customer that you're shipping to is providing the necessary information needing delivery, such as, like I said, if they don't have a liftgate, needing a dock, or not having a dock, needing a liftgate, or even understanding, like I said before, when and if the commodities you're shipping have changed. And like I said,
well, and that's key, recently, and it's possible that the bumping rule, I think, with one of the classes, and the ability to kind of go between classes, they're proposing that that's going to be changed, and they'll get rid of it. So there's an example of one of those changes.
Absolutely. And even with measuring dimensions, make sure you're measuring at the widest part of the shipment. Maybe it fits the pallet at the bottom perfectly square, but then it kind of like bows out a little bit. That's an area that you need to measure, because it could change, your class, and you can and will get hit with that, especially with the dimensionalizers that carriers have today for more accurate, ratings. And also it helps on the back end with being able to validate their changes. They've got a lot of great technology to measure these things accurately, and we need to make sure the shippers on the front end that we're doing the same. And as I mentioned, that this is something that everyone has either dealt with or is currently experiencing. The first thing people really need to ask themselves is, are you aware of the additional costs you're receiving, and why you're receiving them? Second, and really to put it bluntly, what are you doing to alleviate and combat those issues? For me personally, as a consultant to my customers, this is one of my areas of main focus. My goal realistically is to improve their supply chain through education and empowerment, and consultation, understanding these things, and partnered efforts and working together to minimize these issues with communication transparency, and along with providing tools such as TMS, visibility, reporting, to effectively manage their supply chains has proven to be kind of the successful winning combination to mitigating these things. But it all starts with square one, and that's the desire to improve and the monitoring of any issues that people are facing.
Yeah, it's one of our core values, right? And I think it extends to our carrier partners, and especially our customers and our customers' vendors who are shipping inbound. It's all about continuous improvement and doing everything on the front end fundamentally that we can for all parties, so that the experience in freight shipping and the freight shipping process is as problem free as possible. It's going to happen. Issues are going to come up, but the more not knowledge is truly power, and it can help you streamline operations and sort of stabilize things for the long term if you're doing everything you can on the front end to get things right, especially with freight shipment details like class and weight and accessorials, so you don't get, dinged with any extra fees you didn't expect to see, and you can kind of plan and do your accruals and your invoicing appropriately instead of having to eat unforeseen costs that come after the fact. So, Mark, thanks again for offering kind of your real world day-to-day experience that you face with our customers that are shipping freight day in and day out, and for kind of illuminating our listeners on the importance of what may seem basic, but really is pretty important, the fundamentals of creating a bill of lading. So thanks again, Mark. We'll definitely have you on in the future. You are a favorite of the listeners based on your last episode and the stats we're seeing. So thanks again for your voice.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And for all of our listeners of the Freight Project podcast, we thank you for your support and for tuning in for each episode. We'll see you on the next one.